Tonight, breaking news, Trump and Putin say talks to end the war in Ukraine will start immediately. We're told the pair have spoken for an hour and a half on the phone this evening and will visit each other's countries soon. Well, Trump has also called the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, who says he wants a lasting, reliable peace. As for what the deal might look like, well, we've had some huge hints from Trump's new Pentagon chief on a visit to NATO HQ in Brussels, where he's warned the US can't guarantee Europe's security. The UK Defence Secretary, John Healey, was sat alongside him as those remarks were made. He's just been speaking to our Defence and Security editor, Deborah Haynes. We'll bring you the full interview. Back here, Keir Starmer promises to close a loophole that allowed a Palestinian family to live in the UK after applying for a scheme designed for Ukrainians. Also tonight, Reform UK declares war on renewables. I'll be joined by the party's deputy leader, Richard Tice. And the government has released a list of jobs on its skilled worker visa list to come and work in the UK, and you might be surprised who's on it and who isn't. Our very own skilled workers tonight, Baroness Ayesha Hazarika and Sir Ranil Jayawardena, who'll be with us for the next hour. It's Wednesday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Well, today, negotiations to end the war in Ukraine have effectively started. After years of brutal fighting and tens of thousands of deaths, this could be the beginning of the end. But who is making the decisions and at what price? Well, first, let's look at who is doing the talking. Vladimir Putin spent an hour and a half on the phone today with Donald Trump, president of the country that is effectively bankrolling Ukraine's defence. In a statement on his Truth Social platform posted just afterwards, Donald Trump wrote, "We both agreed we want to stop the millions of deaths taking place in the war with Russia-Ukraine. President Putin even used my very strong campaign motto of common sense. We both believe very strongly in it and agreed to work together very closely, including visiting each other's nations. We've also agreed to have our respective teams start negotiations immediately." Well, I guess the question now is whether or not this really is the beginning of the end. And let's have a look, shall we? Because we have learned an awful lot today about what any peace deal could look like. It did feel like the end of an era and the beginning of a new one. And the reason that we know a bit more is because we heard the Defence Secretary of Donald Trump speaking and really laying out the framework of what a potential peace deal could look like when he was at the Ukraine contact meeting in Brussels.
As the war approaches its third anniversary, our message is clear. The bloodshed must stop, and this war must end. We want, like you, a sovereign and prosperous Ukraine. But we must start by recognizing that returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective. Chasing this illusionary goal will only prolong the war and cause more suffering.
Returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective that will only cause more suffering. So in other words, Ukraine needs to give up territory to Russia in order to end the war. That's effectively what he's saying. And then there's this.
The United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. Instead, any security guarantee must be backed by capable European and non-European troops. If these troops are deployed as peacekeepers to Ukraine at any point, they should be deployed as part of a non-NATO mission, and they should not be covered under Article 5. To be clear, as part of any security guarantee, there will not be U.S. troops deployed to Ukraine.
Now, look, there are some in defence and security circles who have always said that NATO membership for Ukraine was an unrealistic prospect. You know, another NATO country with a direct border with Russia, I mean, that comes with obvious risks. But Pete Hegseth is spelling this out more directly than anyone I can really think of previously. Instead, he's saying there should be a peacekeeping force that isn't a NATO mission and, crucially, isn't backed by Article 5. Now, Article 5, of course, that's the promise that an attack on any one member of a NATO is considered an attack against all NATO members. So any peacekeeping force can't expect to be defended by NATO, and the US won't be part of it either. And if the European defence secretaries and leaders gathered today still weren't getting it, there was this.
Safeguarding European security must be an imperative for European members of NATO. As part of this, Europe must provide the overwhelming share of future lethal and non-lethal aid to Ukraine. Part of this is speaking frankly with your people about how this threat can only be met by spending more on defense. 2% is not enough. President Trump has called for 5%, and I agree.
And when Donald Trump suggested that European members of NATO should spend 5% of their GDP on defence, some really didn't take that seriously, but here's his defence secretary echoing that number, 5%. I mean, just think how hard it's been for Labour to map out a path to 2.5%. They're asking us to spend another 65 billion or so on defence. All a little bit awkward for John Healey, the UK Defence Secretary who was there in the room. Here's how he navigated it.
On stepping up for Ukraine, we are and we will. On stepping up for European security, we are and we will. And you've just spoken about peace through strength. We are 50 nations strong here, all determined to put an end to Putin's war, to do so together.
An easy thing to say, delivering it, well, that's another thing, of course. Well, joining us now from Brussels is our Security and Defence Editor, Deborah Haynes, and in Washington, our US correspondent, Mark Stone. Mark, to you first. I guess Donald Trump would see this as exactly what he planned to do all along.
Yeah, stop the fighting is what he has said throughout. I suppose the overarching question, as it has been as the contours of the Trump plan began to take shape, is stopping the fighting is one thing, but to whose advantage? And it feels today as though those contours are to Putin's advantage. That's certainly how many in Europe, I think, will see it. And if Donald Trump sees himself, as he does, as the consummate negotiator, it felt a little today as though his defense secretary was giving away some pretty key bargaining chips, as we have seen before with Donald Trump, saying the quiet stuff out loud. I mean, quietly, people have been suggesting that, NATO membership for Ukraine, maybe that is a step too far, that yes, maybe at some point in the negotiation, Russia would end up taking some of the land that it has fought over and occupied over the course of this long war, not just in the past few years, but since the war first began in 2014. But those were things that were said quietly and not said publicly by the leader of the free world. And the fact that Hegseth, the defense secretary, has now said those things, does that mean that he's given away quite a lot in the negotiation that will come? Well, Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, was asked that in the briefing just now. And she interestingly, what she said was it's the president that's going to do the negotiating, sort of reintroducing some ambiguity to the American position. Maybe there is still some negotiation to be done on land in the east of the country. So really suggesting that he is the man, the president is the man that will do the negotiating, almost implicitly undermining what the defense secretary had said just a few hours earlier. I think that's all part of the strategy, to confuse people, make sure people don't quite know where they stand. That is the case with everything with Donald Trump. But listen to her statement at the beginning of her briefing, where she echoed the position of America right now.
I myself just spoke to the president about these calls, and he told me to tell all of you they were very good calls, they were very positive, and the administration is wholeheartedly committed to a peace deal to end once and for all the Russia-Ukraine war.
Now, we cannot understate the significance of the two calls that Donald Trump had this morning, specifically the call with Vladimir Putin. You have to go back to December 2021 for the last time an American president spoke to Putin. That was, of course, Joe Biden, and it was prior to the invasion of Ukraine. Not only have they now spoken, Trump and Putin, for an hour and a half, an extraordinarily long time, but the Truth Social post from Donald Trump suggested it was a great call, and we heard from Caroline Levitt that she believes that Donald Trump that Russia is a great competitor. She emphasised great, and at times an adversary. And the fact that they are now due to meet at some stage, I mean, we don't know when that will happen, but from Putin's perspective, that's a big win.
Thank you very much indeed. Mark Stone speaking to us there from Washington. Now let's bring in our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, shall we? Deborah, you've been speaking to John Healey today. How is the UK going to navigate things?
Well, this whole situation is incredibly uncomfortable for all European NATO allies. You've got a war here in Europe, and yet who is doing the talking about how to end it? It's Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. For Ukraine, what's been said today is a disaster. Yes, not surprising. They were fully expecting the US not to underline the idea of Ukraine joining NATO as part of these so-called security guarantees that Ukraine is seeking as part of any negotiated settlement with Russia. But the fact that the US has come out so strongly saying there will be no American troops on the ground in Ukraine as part of any peacekeeping force, this hypothetical force that the UK and France and others have been talking about, is a big blow to Vladimir Zelensky. He told me, I spoke to him in Kyiv last week, and he said to me that it would be a major mistake for there to be no US element in whatever peacekeeping force is potentially sent to Ukraine to try to ensure that if there is a frozen conflict at the end of whatever peace negotiation is going to go on, that Russia wouldn't then attack again. He specifically was signalling that he didn't believe a European-only military would be a sufficient deterrent to stop Vladimir Putin from trying again. And that really does then point to the other massive problem here for Europe, which, again, the US Defense Secretary underlined. And that is that the US has effectively been bankrolling European security since the end of the Cold War. It's the frustration that's been repeatedly expressed by countless administrations, but Donald Trump does it most bluntly, most starkly, and also is ready to take action rather than just give rhetoric. So he has said that NATO allies need to spend 5% of national income on defence. In fact, the NATO Secretary General himself, when I was speaking to him today, said that he expects the defence spending target to rise north of 3%. Where's the UK in this? The UK tells everybody it's one of the biggest, most powerful, most important members of the NATO alliance, and yet it only spends 2.3% on defence and has yet to even set out a path, as you were saying, to 2.5%, a marginal increase which people inside the military fully acknowledge is nowhere near enough. And actually, when I spoke to John Healey, I asked him 7 times whether the UK, should increase defence spending above 2.5%. He refused to be drawn on that, kept swerving around as you know politicians tend to. And then I also asked him, could he guarantee that if the government decides it has to stick to this 2.5% limit, that there would be no cuts to the armed forces? Again, he wouldn't be drawn on that. And if the UK were to cut the military, which people on the inside say would have to happen if there isn't a significant increase in spending, how would that go down? Well, how would that go down, in the White House? Pretty badly.
So do you agree with the US that Ukraine shouldn't be a NATO member and that its borders, like Crimea, needs to stay in? It's unrealistic to think it'll go back to Ukraine.
Well, Secretary Hegseth today made clear that it was not the US view that NATO membership would be part of any immediate settlement, but NATO's made a long-term commitment to Ukraine, that its rightful place is in NATO. There's a going to have to be a clear process for that, and it will take time. The important thing is that we are ready to support Ukraine in its fighting, ready to support Ukraine if it starts talking, and ready to support Ukraine beyond the fighting when we hope it stops.
And what about the Crimea? Is it okay for Crimea to remain in Russian hands?
It's the Ukrainians that are doing the fighting. It's for them to decide when to start talking and on what terms. And that will be part of the negotiations, and I think we're getting ahead of ourselves with that sort of detail.
So Donald Trump has said that NATO members need to spend 5% of GDP on their defences. Mark Rutte is saying north of 3%. Is the UK government going to have to reconsider its defence spending target of, at some point in the future, 2.5% of GDP?
European NATO nations are doing more. They're spending more on defence. The non-US NATO members this year increased defence spending. Together, we increased by 20%, nearly $80 billion. Everyone accepts we need to spend more on defence. We're a government that was elected just last year with a commitment to increase UK defence spending to 2.5% of GDP. That's a level we've not spent in the UK since 2010, when Labour was last in government. And we've already increased funding for defence this year by £3 billion. We are doing more. We know we must do more still. And with other European allies, we will.
So do you believe that it will need to go above 2.5% for the UK?
We're increasing defence spending. We've already done it. No, we've already done it for this year.
Important, though. Are you credible? How can you possibly be credible sticking to 2.5%? You're the Defence Secretary. Are you comfortable with the UK only aiming to spend 2.5%?
I'm proud we're a government that was elected to increase defence spending.
To 2.5%?
That we've made a commitment to increase defence spending that we've not seen in Britain for 15 years.
There's a war in Europe.
That is part of the wider effort that I was chairing, where European nations and others recognise that we must increase defence spending, and we will.
Can you commit, therefore, if the UK government policy remains at 2.5% spending for defence, that you will not cut any part of the UK armed forces?
We will increase defence spending.
Can you commit that you won't cut anything?
We will increase defence spending because we must do that to meet the threats.
Deborah Haynes speaking there to the Defence Secretary. Well, we are joined by our International Affairs Editor, Dominic Wagcon. Dominic, it's one of those days where I'm really glad to have you here in the studio, I'm not going to lie, to try and kind of work out what is going on, the magnitude of what's happening, because it does really feel like the kind of ground is shifting.
Well, it's one of those days when, which we got used to in the first Trump presidency, but it's been an extraordinary day where we just got slapped one way or the other by surprises and things that kind of really, I think, sort of are deeply unsettling. Sometimes with Trump, you kind of feel it's quite amusing, the pace of events, and journalists can almost have a laugh about it. What's happened today is profoundly disturbing if you're in Ukraine, deeply sickening, I think, for people in Kyiv. And it is unsettling. It's a day where we've seen some of the fundamental principles of sort of recent geopolitics, but also geopolitics going back to the Second World War, being effectively abandoned, or certainly America moving away from them. So coming up to the third anniversary of a European country being invaded in an unprovoked invasion, we have the Americans saying for the first time that their priorities mean that they are prevented from being primarily focused on the security of Europe. So America has been a pillar of security, the pillar of security and prosperity in Europe, if you like, the fundamental pillar of that post-war architecture that the Americans built to protect themselves and to make themselves prosperous, but also for the West. And that's been a kind of an assumption we've always had, that they will carry on supporting that. Now, we have a Secretary of Defence, a young and experienced one coming here, but clearly with a message from his president that we can't rely on that security. We don't know to what extent, but certainly casting doubts on it. And then we have the president breaking what has been a principle of American policy for 3 years, that nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. He has had a bilateral meeting with Vladimir Putin where they have discussed Ukraine. Yes, they notified Zelensky, and he notified Zelensky in a phone call afterwards, but the Kremlin says that commitments were made by Donald Trump in that call, we assume about Ukraine, and they will be held to them. So that he's had a discussion with Putin that's not included Ukraine, and we don't know what kind of commitments he's made or what kind of concessions are being made. But what's most unsettling is his defence secretary in Brussels seemed to kind of break one of his own rules. I mean, he's a man who's regarded as a coercive negotiator, someone who goes in, all guns blazing, demands that, and then settles for that. It's not part of his art of the deal to give bargaining chips away as significantly as Hegseth did today. You know, he's saying that it is illusory for the Ukrainians to believe they can expel the Russians entirely out of Ukraine. And as Mark was saying, that's been kind of, people have been talking about that behind the scenes. But to give it away before negotiations have even begun doesn't make great sense from a negotiating tactic point of view. He's also saying there'll be no American troops in this peacekeeping force, and any non-American troops won't be protected by Article 5. All of that is music to Vladimir Putin's ears. And the bottom line for the Ukrainians is they are prepared. And they've been prepared to say in the open interviews with Sky News, with Stuart Ramsey, that they're prepared to give up some land on a temporary basis if there are the security guarantees to stop Russia invading again. And I think in most people's minds, any deterrent force that doesn't include America and doesn't include that NATO deterrence is not going to deter Russia. So
and
for
I guess
Ukrainians,
another point on that as well, you know, if you're the UK, do you want to take part in a peacekeeping force that isn't backed by NATO,
Absolutely.
that isn't backed by the US? If you're on the border with Russia, what does that mean?
Exactly. If you're Keir Starmer, will you actually send troops in harm's way into Ukraine, or Emmanuel Macron, knowing that in a few years' time, Russia may not invade again, but it may use a kind of green man tactics, it may use grey zone tactics, it may use hybrid warfare that could kill British soldiers, but this time round they won't have the guarantee of NATO support. You will think long and hard about that, John Healey and Keir Starmer, before he sends British troops out to Ukraine. So it is... I think the other fundamental principle that's been kind of abandoned, it seems today, is that the Russians will be rewarded for their unprovoked aggression of an invasion of Ukraine, because they are going to get some of the land that they have taken by force. So it's a feeling really at the end of the day of an earthquake continuing, as we sort of felt from the beginning of the Trump presidency, not just aftershocks, but one earthquake after another. Where it's going to lead isn't entirely clear. But if you're sitting in Kyiv tonight, it's a deeply worrying situation. And anybody who believes that might should not be seen to be right should be worried, I think, by the way things are going. OK, thank you very much indeed, Dominic Waghorn, there for us. Well, Ukraine and the signalling of peace talks is sure to feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview. That's from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us for that will be the Daily Mirror's associate editor, Kevin Maguire, and the deputy comment editor at The Telegraph, Annabelle Denham. Right, let's bring in our duo for this evening, shall we? The Labour peer Baroness Ayesha Hazarika, the former Conservative Minister, Sir Ranil Jayawardena. Thank you both very much for being here. I mean, there is so much that we could pick apart here, whether it is Ukrainian war, whether it is defence spending in the UK, whether it is the fact that America somehow is saying that it's not going to guarantee Europe's security. There's just so much to go into. Ayesha, what's your kind of initial reaction to it all?
Just really reflecting on what Dominic was saying, I feel like so many geopolitical orthodoxies have just been ripped up today. And the thing which is always extraordinary about Donald Trump is that he's somebody that can just rip things up so quickly. Things which have grown up, conventions that have been established for decades and decades since the Second World War, NATO, the principles of NATO. And I just think politicians and governments and anyone who cares about defence and security is going to be reeling all around the world from this. There's just so much to unpack from this. But what he's clearly sending a message out is he's going to back Russia in this. He's pretty much going to be saying to President Zelensky, this is what you're going to have to accept. And I think people in Ukraine and also for the other people have recently joined NATO as well. The idea that, there was always this principle in NATO, which is an attack on one is an attack on all. But clearly what America is saying now, no, that's all changing. An attack in Europe, you're kind of on your own. That's a big, big change.
I can see you shaking your head.
No, I respect what you've said, but I disagree with that conclusion and a few other points that got you towards that. I don't think the US has said that Article 5 no longer applies. The point is that the US is being clear, and this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone who's been following the US presidential election, and indeed, from my conversations with folks in the Republican Party, this has been pretty clear for some time. The US is coming to a view that it can't any longer afford to be the world's policeman, and so the day-to-day running of security operations in Europe is what they're saying will be Europe's burden to bear. And the US has significant security challenges in the Pacific as well, which it is looking at versus China, let's be really honest. So there's I think, a reality there from the US that it can't pay for everything. It wants Europe to step up and pay more. And if Article 5 was triggered, the US, I'm sure, would still honour its commitments. But that's why they've been clear that Ukraine won't be able to join NATO. That's the whole point.
With the NATO point, I do wonder is Donald Trump saying what nobody else has, I guess, been kind of honest enough to say for a while now, that the idea of Ukraine joining NATO is actually very difficult from a security point of view?
Well, I think, I'd love to have your certainty in the fact that, all the old orthodoxies will be stuck to. I absolutely don't think that. I think what we do know is that Donald Trump is very ruthlessly putting America first on everything. And I just don't think we can have any guarantees about what future geopolitical policy looks like from America. It's definitely going to be very erratic. And I think the point that Dominic made was really interesting there, which was when you go into a negotiation, you're not meant to put everything on the table straight away. And he's already, right up until now, a kind of an agreed line from all the allies has been, no one's going to make any deal on behalf of Ukraine. We are not going to reward an unprovoked... It's generally agreed that Ukraine did not deserve the attack, right? We all agree on that. We're not part of those conspiracy theory that they provoked it.
And I totally agree with your point about negotiation as well.
Yeah,
I totally agree
some of those guys.
So he's already kind of sending a message saying we are going to reward an unprovoked attack. And once that's on the table and saying, look, we're going to... You can keep some of this land that you've completely sort of taken unfairly from the Ukrainians. That's putting Zelensky in a very difficult position, and supporters of Zelensky in a difficult position.
But just on the accession of Ukraine to NATO, I actually don't think it is a surprise that President Trump has chosen to be clear now that that is not on the table. And certainly, folks I've been speaking to, businesses I'm advising, when they have asked this question, I've been really clear that this is exactly where President Trump was going to go. It doesn't make that right or wrong from our perspective, but the point is this should not be an uncertainty.
But what will be interesting is if geopolitics changes, let's say China makes some incursion into Taiwan, it'll be interesting to see if Donald Trump will be like, hey, fine, it's fine for you to have a bit of Taiwan. I don't think he'll be taking that tone.
But this is why he is also right to say that Europe has to actually pull its weight.
5%, is that the right ballpark?
Well, look, I'm not going to say I'm an expert on all the kit and all the forces that we need, but the fact was that there was a plan to get to 2.5%.
He says 5%, another 65 billion quid you've got to find there.
But the plan even to go to 2.5% has been dodged now. And you heard there the dodging of the question from the new government, which is a shame. And, I do believe that we've certainly got to up the spending. And perhaps along the way, maybe a 3% target for now. Let's be positive.
Well, I mean, look, it is difficult to be advised on, the past finances when there was, so much of a black hole left by the last administration. But look, there's no doubt...
Train driver salaries or defence?
There's a reason why you lost the election
Train driver salaries or defence?
And that is, that's a COVID corruption or defence. We can play this game. We can trade this game.
I feel like this could go on for a while.
But the point is there's going to be very, very difficult spending and this is going to be tough.
OK, thanks both very much indeed. Lots more from both of you throughout the programme. You're watching the Politics Club coming up. A clash of PMQs over migration, but who came out on top? Up next, though, I'm going to be speaking to Reform's Deputy Leader, Richard Tice, as his party targets money spent getting the UK to net zero. Stay with us.
Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
An enormous explosion that's just come down. I think it was a monster just landed in between us.
Hundreds and hundreds of people hoping to get north, ultimately to get to the United States. It's a border where they're not welcome, yet they keep coming.
We saw snatch squads going in, grabbing people, taking them out and putting them into trucks and taking them away.
They make about 50 kilos of fentanyl a week. It's incredibly dangerous and toxic stuff.
There's been an upsurge in deaths. The fighting between the gangs is getting more and more vicious.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah.
The battlefield is outside the barricades, which is over there. This is much more like a normal town. It's really sending a clear message that Venezuela is eager for change. We've been crushed.
Free from wherever you get your news.
We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. This is real, hardcore emergency medicine.
The information on this could bring down the entire network, not just in Iraq and Syria, but across the world.
Sky News, the full story first. Hundreds of thousands of people have been using the beast for years to traverse Mexico, but it is really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Well, Reform UK have been setting out today their plan to undo policies to make the UK economy net zero, including targeting subsidies for renewable energy. We're joined now by Reform UK's deputy leader. Keen to talk about the net zero policy, but it feels right to start with the story we've been leading on this evening, which is that phone call between Putin and Trump, the beginning of the negotiations to end the Ukraine war. But I guess the question on everyone's lips is, at what price? I mean, are we in a situation where Ukraine is just going to have to, in your view, just give up land to Russia?
Well, at the end of the day, almost all wars end by the opposing sides talking. And President Trump has started that talking. And if the call was 90 minutes, clearly quite a lot was discussed. You've reported there what Secretary Hegseth was saying. And we all know that President Trump negotiates from a significant sort of one end of the spectrum. Who knows where it'll end up? But everybody wants the war, the killing to stop, the cost to stop. And President Trump made that very clearly when he was being elected. So we shouldn't be surprised by any of this. But I would take a different stance from your previous correspondent.
Dominic Wackhorn.
In that I think very often things are not quite what they seem.
You say that when you're negotiating, you start at one point and then you move to the middle. Some people would say he's already starting pretty close to what Vladimir Putin would want right now.
The first mistake to make.
Just explain to me, because just setting it out how, he's
well, there's multiple, clearly.
Just let me explain, because he's saying, that Ukraine won't have NATO membership and that Ukraine will not be able to go to the pre-2014 borders. So that some people would say...
There's two elements to that. The first element of that is that the difficulty with NATO and Article 5 is that you get much closer to a bump point where you're in danger of having NATO fighting Russia, and clearly that has horrific consequences and potential risks. The second thing, with regard to the 2014 border, well, I don't think anybody seriously... I mean, Crimea's been part of Russia for that period of time. No one really thought that... seriously thought that you were going to change Crimea.
Was fighting to try and get it, wasn't it?
Of course.
They probably thought that they had a
understandably, but at the end of the day, most wars end with some form of compromise deal and involve difficult compromises, just like we had difficult compromises in Northern Ireland. You know, this stuff is really difficult, but at the end of the day, I think, and you want to negotiate from a position of strength, and you know, that was part of the success of what Ukraine did, insurging into Russia.
You talked there about the difficulty of Article 5 and avoiding that direct confrontation. I guess my question is, you know, if you're Ukraine, you're going to want some kind of guarantee that Russia isn't just going to come back in, right? Not US troops, that's what Trump has said, not NATO. So what do you think the UK should provide peacekeeping forces?
But you haven't thought about, your colleague didn't talk about, well, OK, so...
Sorry, you can put it on me, it's fine.
Yeah,
I can wear it,
if the US is
girl.
saying, we don't want to put troops on the ground, but then there's an obvious, OK, but can we have some money for some kit? Can we have an Iron Dome system? Other sorts of ways of providing an effective security and defence guarantee that is all in the mix of the negotiation. We're just at the beginning of all of this. All of these things have to be on the table.
Do you think that we should spend 5% of GDP on defence, as Donald Trump wants?
Look, I mean, at the end of the day, we used to spend big numbers like that. Based on our current economy and the way we spend money at the moment, that is clearly not possible.
So it's not possible, you don't think, to spend 5%
based on the
GDP?
current situation, you know, in our contract, we were saying we've got to get to 3% in 6 years' time. And that is, given everything that's going on in the world,
so
that is absolutely...
Is he being unrealistic, do you think, then, by saying 5%?
At the end of the day, President Trump will always negotiate very aggressively. And if you want people to settle at 3, you don't start at 3, you start at 5.
OK. Right, let's talk about your net zero announcement, shall we? I was quite struck by one part of your policy, which was saying that farmers who use their land for solar panels should be subject to a special tax upon their death. I mean, I thought you were the guys out and about defending farmers against
Absolutely, we are defending.
tax.
So we would abolish, as we had in our contract, abolish all inheritance tax, including the dreadful family farm tax. But you can't have it both ways. You can't double dip. So there should be no inheritance tax on farmers. But if farmers who decide they don't want to be involved in providing food security, they actually want to sell out to the renewable pound, well, then they've taken their money up front, so to speak. They've given up food security, and therefore they wouldn't benefit from that inheritance tax.
Do you think
tax
they're
relief.
like exploiting subsidies by putting solar panels on their farms? Is that what you think they're doing?
We want to get rid of all subsidies. We want to recover that money. That's the key part of our policy. We'd have a windfall tax to recover the subsidies, give or take 10 billion a year. So it's a special windfall tax on all the renewables, including the likes of wind, solar, Drax Power Station. And then we're also having a ban on these very dangerous battery energy storage systems that people are not focusing on.
I guess just to go back finally to the solar panel one, you know, I'm just really struck by, you know, you're scrapping all inheritance tax apart from on farmers who have solar panels on their land.
Because they've already taken...
I'm trying to work out why you're singling out farmers with solar. Do you think it's morally wrong to have solar panels on farmland?
Because you can't benefit twice, right? You can't double dip. So if you take the renewable pound up front, early doors, and you give up on food security, you've already had your money up front.
So why are solar panels the only thing that you pay inheritance tax on?
Because let's put solar panels on the roofs of homes and sheds, not on productive farmland, including in my constituency of Boston and Skegness.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Richard Tice speaking to us there. Coming up next on the Politics Hub. A clash at PMQs over migration, but who came out on top? welcome back. Well, Kemi Badenoch made human rights and migration the focus of her questions at PMQs today, raising the case of a family of 6 from Gaza given refuge in the UK through a scheme established to help Ukrainians settle here. Now, the Prime Minister said he would change the law to close what he called a loophole, but the Conservative leader broadened her attack.
The Prime Minister literally wrote a book on the European Convention on Human Rights. This is a situation where we need to put our national interests before the ECHR. Does he agree that we should legislate even if lawyers warn that this might be incompatible with human rights law?
Prime Minister. She complains about scripted answers and questions. Her script doesn't allow her to listen to the answer.
Prime Minister.
She asked me if we're going to change the law and close the loophole in question 1. I said yes. She asked me again in question 2, and I said yes. She asked me again in question 3. It's still yes.
Oh, it's a bit awkward, isn't it, watching the replay. Right, Ali Fortescue was at PMQs, our political correspondent. Ali, what did you make of the exchanges today?
Oh, look, I don't think it was Kemi Badenoch's best PMQs. That's not coming from me. I bumped into a few Tories on the way back. And one person who previously was pretty sympathetic was saying, look, bear with her, like Margaret Thatcher, she's not going to peak too early. This time, today was like, I expected more from her today. That wasn't everyone. You know, someone else was a bit more sympathetic. They said that others deliberately trying to stir things up, that you can't win all of them, that last week had been better. But, you know, she chose to go down the rabbit hole on this legal loophole. This is about a Palestinian family that were allowed asylum here in the UK under the Homes for Ukraine scheme. But if there's someone you don't necessarily want to go down the rabbit hole on a legal loophole with, is that, you know, the man accused of being a lawyer, Keir Starmer. You know, she did have a point on it's not all comfortable for Labour, particularly questions around Richard Hermer, the Attorney General, friend of Keir Starmer. You know, she's touching on things that are not totally comfortable at all for the Labour Party. But he was coming out swinging. You could see in that clip there, accusing her of not understanding the legal judgment. And it did feel, you know, I was in there, you could feel the mood, like the mood was with him. It's easy when you've got many more people behind you. But, you know, there's no shortage of subjects for her to go on. We're expecting economic forecasts to be downgraded, steel tariffs. There's lots she could have gone on.
And you've been busy today. You've been at the Reform UK event as well that we were just talking to Richard Tice about. How was that?
I was, yeah. Look, the mood at these events from the Reform lot, I have to say, it does feel pretty charged. You know, they're optimistic. They're obviously doing well in the polls. That Sky YouGov poll that they're all talking about where they came out on top is one poll, or there have been a couple. But they wanted to talk, you were talking to him about this big policy announcement around pushing back on net zero, windfall tax on wind farms, inheritance tax relief for farmers who signed up for solar panels being taken away. I mean, that you were pushing him on rightly, because I'm still sort of trying to get my head around it, but it does sound like these farmers, you know, you've got to ask the question why it is just these farmers that are being targeted. But, you know, they're not the first party to spot a political opportunity when it comes to anti-green measures. I think, you know, we saw Rishi Sunak doing that a bit as well after, you will remember, Sophie, the Uxbridge by-election.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Going into the weeds now, aren't we? But look,
the famous moment.
Yeah, exactly. But there is a tension between the cost of living and expensive net zero targets. That is something that Reform are trying to tap into. Yeah. Most of the public actually agree with net zero, but Richard Tice said we're asking the wrong question. It should be about whether people want their bills to go up.
I love a little bit of by-election chat with you, Ali. It's all we're good. Thanks very much.
I didn't lose too many viewers.
No, it's fine. Hopefully a couple still with us. Thanks very much, Ali. Well, Kemi Badenoch recently passed the 100 days mark as Conservative Party leader. The latest edition of Electoral Dysfunction has been asking how she's getting on. Just scan the QR code on your screen to listen to the latest edition. Right, let's chat to Ayesha and Ranil again, shall we? Ranil, look, it is quite hard for the Conservatives. I mean, you probably admit this yourself, right, for the moment, because, you know, if you're an interview like me, the Conservatives start attacking Labour for anything, the first thing you're going to do is, well, hang on a minute, look at the last 13 years of you. And then you have Reform, who don't have, you know, a record. They're like a kind of clean skin in this game, if you like. How on earth are you supposed to deal with that threat?
Yeah, well, first of all, I have to say, yes, we were in government. Yes, we made some mistakes, and that's what Kemi has said as part of trying to rebuild trust with the people. There's no point denying that we did get some things wrong. That it's important to level with the public first. And, when people are saying Kemi should come out with all sorts of policies on, whether it's net zero or anything else, actually, no. The first thing is to make sure that we have a licence to operate again, that people do want to hear from us. And that's going to require an awful lot of work first before we get into anything else. In terms of reform, fine, they've not got a record, but that's a problem. Come the general election, are the British public really seriously going to vote for a party that have no record ever of serving in government and put them into bat to run this country? That's a huge risk, and I think the British people are smarter than that.
Ayesha.
Well, we're going to know quite soon because there's very important elections coming up in May, and that's going to be really interesting because the last set of these particular type of elections, the Conservatives did really, really well. So it's going to be a great big test for Kemi Badenoch to see how many seats they can hold on to. And to your point, that will be a test for the British public as to whether they're prepared to give reform the benefit of the doubt with important local council elections and mayoral elections. If you look at a seat like the area like Lincolnshire, it looks like Andrea Jenkins, who defected from the Conservatives to reform, stands a very good chance. So I think the PMQs today was really interesting because Kemi Badenoch had an absolute stinker of a PMQs, and I've had many Conservatives get in contact with me just going head in hands. But it was quite a reveal on many levels. First of all, she and her team did not do their homework. Now, you can slag off Keir Starmer for many things, but he is a bit of a swot. His team does do their due diligence on things. And one of the key things about PMQs is if you're going to ask questions of the Prime Minister, make sure you kind of know what all the rejoinders and answers could possibly be. So they didn't do their homework on that key question. She also didn't listen in the moment. The fact that he kind of came back and said, you didn't listen once, you didn't listen twice, you didn't listen for the third time, that's her clinging to her script, and that's sending a signal that she's not very good at being in the moment. The other thing they didn't do their due diligence on was she did a story about the front page of the Daily Mail, which if she just fact-checked wasn't actually accurate. So what a lot of Conservatives are saying to me is, look, PMQs, and I remember this in my time in opposition as well, working with Ed Miliband, and I did a book on PMQs, interviewed the great William Hague, who was brilliant at PMQs, and he was saying that when your party has been crushed after a general election, PMQs is a really important way of showing your backbenchers that you've still got a bit of fight, and that did not happen today.
Well, first of all, William Hague was great at PMQs, but that PMQs does not decide an election, because if it did, he'd have won the 2001 election.
Sure, but she's not good at PMQs either.
Second, Keir Starmer, it suggested, actually misled the House on a point of fact about law, about when a case was decided. He said it was decided under the Conservatives. No, it was actually decided in January 2025, so very much in the Labour administration. So I think people should get some latitude sometimes if they slip up. But third, as you said, when these elections, these local elections were last had, we were at a high watermark, almost an all-time high watermark, certainly in my lifetime. We were polling 50% in the polls. So it's going to be a tough one, yes. The situation has changed. The vaccine bounce, as there was then, is no longer with us, clearly.
So you're admitting that you're going to have so Kemi Badenoch is going to have a very bad night.
It's going to be a tough time. But I think Labour need to look more carefully, because the switch in the polls is now not from us to reform, it's from Labour.
Well, look,
in Lincolnshire, in the red wall that we used to call it, it's those seats that are now going to reform. That's your people who are at risk.
And there are 89 seats, Labour seats, in which the reform came second. But if you look at these elections that are coming up, Labour is fielding far fewer seats than the Conservatives are. So just in terms of the narrative, and I accept it, Labour is having a lot of problems. I'm not here arguing night as day. I'm not here as a Labour spokesperson. I don't know if you're here as a Tory spokesperson. Certainly,
well, you're
Labour,
in the Lords. I'm not in Parliament at all.
So certainly Labour has had a difficult time. But we all know about how narratives get set. And right now, reform has got a lot of momentum behind it. And where they are really pulling support from is the Conservatives. And these elections, particularly if Andrea Jenkins wins in Lincolnshire, that's going to be a big moment for that narrative between the Conservative Party and reform. I mean, I've had Conservative peers coming on my radio show saying, actually, the Conservatives should be doing a pact with reform. Things are so bad.
Just wait and see what happens in Wales in 2026, because it looks like Welsh Labour will, for the first time, not run Wales. And, that is going to be a big moment, losing that support
But let's
to
get
reform.
to that. What comes first, 2026 or May?
Well, I've already said...
Great. So let's see what happens in May, and then we'll move on from there.
But the polls are very clear. You're the ones losing support to reform.
Really interesting to hear from both of you. Enjoyed that a lot. Thanks both very much. Still to come on the Politics Hub. Should a grass cutter be eligible for a skilled worker visa? About a nun. We'll look at what professions are on the approved list, and we'll also test our duo. That's next.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8 o'clock, the Prime Minister promises the families of Barnaby Webber, Grace O'Malley Kumar and Ian Coates a judge-led public inquiry into the Nottingham attacks. Tonight, I'll get the family's reaction. Plus, a review finds a man who killed the MP, Sir David Amess, was released from the Prevent anti-terror programme too quickly. We'll be hearing from his daughter, Katie. And we're going to meet the fastest 15-year-old in history. All that to come and much more on the UK Tonight at 8.
We've come to one of Moscow's Cold War bunkers. It was built as a top-secret command centre.
Being here really feels like you're stepping back in time. I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
A show of military might and menace.
Courage, bravery and sacrifice will win the day.
It's a new subject. They'll learn about combat drones and some how to handle a Kalashnikov.
The Kremlin continues to put forward its own version of events, both present and past.
There's no mention of the fact that Russia invaded its neighbour. That's rewriting history, isn't it?
Now we have to read it carefully.
Vladimir Putin put forward his plan for a ceasefire in Ukraine, telling Kiev, pull out of your eastern territories and the war will end. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Vladimir Putin is already the Kremlin's longest-serving leader since Stalin. The question is, what will a fifth Putin term mean for Russia and the world?
Why do you support Vladimir Putin, Mr. Segal?
I can't answer questions that stupid.
I've watched Vladimir Putin attempt to create a new world order.
The St. Petersburg Economic Forum was the backdrop to Vladimir Putin's latest verbal volley that Russia could send missiles to other nations to target the West.
Ambassador, I wonder, shall we have a quick word for Sky News?
Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine?
Swedish media, oh my God, you're not afraid of being here.
American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display.
Russia says Evan Gershkovich was caught red-handed, but has never produced any evidence to back that up. Sky News. Get the full story first.
We're going to do this 100 times every day for the next 3 months.
Why have we agreed to this?
Raises many questions about many things.
Actually seeing people impacted, she was so upset.
It was powerful. They kind of couldn't believe they were being berated here.
Very much on my terms, I think was the subtext. News happens fast around Donald Trump.
It was a kind of wow moment.
Yeah, that's what it feels like, doesn't it?
It's Trump world, and we just live in it.
So, where next?
Follow Trump 100 wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, The Guardian today wrote up the findings of an Oxford academic who's been delving down into the government list of jobs that qualify for a skilled worker visa. And at a time when, of course, the government's under pressure to reduce net migration, it had a couple of professions which I guess maybe raised some eyebrows. Dog groomers, Pilates instructor. We have had a look at this list ourselves, and we're going to have a little test, a little quiz on whether we think the following jobs are on the skilled visa list. I'm going to say there's no judgment here on whether these are actually important jobs or not, whether they're skilled jobs or not. It's just whether they're on the official list. Right, the first job is a grass cutter. Is that on the skilled worker list, do we reckon? Yes or no?
For a golf course, maybe that ticks a box.
I feel like it might be.
It is. It absolutely is, yeah. Yeah. Lawns of the UK, very grateful. The second one, a nun. Is that on the
Yes,
skilled
I think that is on the list.
It actually isn't on the list.
Oh!
No, I know. Outrage, right?
I thought nuns were on the run.
Nuns, no. Sorry, guys. No. Mixologist, on the list. What do you reckon?
No, surely not. Surely we can mix our own cocktails in this country.
Might be. So hospitality does have some quirks.
It's not on the list, much to the hospitality industry's disappointment. I enjoyed that Emily, when she's put mixologist beverages, it's like, unfortunately, I know very well what a mixologist is. Dance movement therapist.
No.
I'm going to say yes.
It is on the list.
I'm not very good at this game,
Yeah, I'll
am
be
I?
honest. You're not doing well here. Seamstress. How about seamstress? On the list?
Yes, I think that is on the list.
Yeah, probably.
It's not.
Oh.
I know. I would have thought that wouldn't be on, to be honest. But it is not on the list. Train driver?
Surely not.
Surely not.
Not on the list.
Thank goodness
It's not
for
on the
that.
list. Voice coach?
Not on the list.
It actually is on the list.
Oh my gosh! Wow, who knew?
I know.
Who
There you
knew?
go.
Who knew?
I mean, very, very important job that voice coaches obviously do.
Key worker, obviously.
Very, very important key workers, clearly. How about presenter?
I think a news reporter is.
It actually is.
on
Yeah,
the
so
list.
like happy for us. I'm pretty tough with that. Well, I'm not sure if it's a skilled. I mean, honest. I look at like the train
Essential,
driver and
highly
the seamstress.
essential.
I feel like I'm slightly less essential. Member of Parliament, maybe.
Not essential at all.
Sadly not.
Yeah,
sorry
not
guys.
essential at all.
Sorry.
Too many of those as it is. Way too many of us in the Lords. Way too many.
Love it. Thanks both very much indeed. Great to have you,
Thank you.
on the Politics Hub this evening. Well, that is it from us tonight. I'll see you tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Sarah J. Mee. And then at 9 p.m, you've got The World with Yalda Hakim. So much news, of course, to cover. That's it from us tonight, but I'll see you tomorrow.